Good morning, good morning, beautiful people. Good afternoon, good evening. No matter what time it is, just know this is the day that the Lord has made, and I will rejoice and be glad in it. As always, God is good, and He is good all the time. All right, so we're doing a reaction today, and it's about cross-dressing. I decided to do it on cross-dressing because I hear it all the time. People talking about how men should dress as men, women should dress like women, and people think that cross-dressing, homosexuality are new phenomenons, right? The Bible said it best than anyone else. Ain't nothing new under the sun. Ain't nothing new. Everything that we see, everything that people do, every way people talk, all of it, it's just recycled behavior, right? But we gotta educate. We gotta educate because people think that things have been a certain way since the beginning of time because it's been a certain way for a very long time, and that's just not true, right? People think that females have always been inferior to men and such, and that's just not the case. If you read the Bible, then you know that women aren't inferior to men. In fact, when the Bible says woman submit unto your husband, it's saying woman submit to your husband. And in that same scripture, it says husband, love your wives as you love yourself, right? If you love your wife as you love yourself, if you love yourself, you wouldn't treat yourself as a slave. You wouldn't want yourself to submit in a way where it's like you're placing a hierarchy and one is under the other. You're equal. Love is equal. The Bible tells us, it says love, when you love someone, you put the needs of others above yourself. It's not selfishness, it's selflessness, right? If you got love, you're not going to view someone as inferior to yourself, as as superior to yourself, none of that. But you got these weirdos out here who want to motherfucking misconstrue, information to fit the narrative that they pushing, and majority of the time it's misinformation, okay? Things have not always been the way you think it is, right? Even when it comes to dress and a lot of this stuff, people fail to realize a lot of the laws of the land is just a way to maintain their superiority, right? And for those that are in this inferior position to maintain it. That's all it is. But we're going to dive into this motherfucking video because I want to educate y'all, because when it comes to gay, man, woman stuff, people lose their minds, y'all. People lose their minds. So without further ado, let's get into it.
If you're a woman and you're wearing pants right now, you could have been arrested. Walking down the street today, most of us wouldn't bat an eye at a woman wearing pants or a man in a pink and flowery shirt, but believe it or not, until pretty recently, there were laws in many countries that forbade a person from appearing publicly in clothes that didn't align with their biological sex. Oh, did I say recently? Yeah, sorry, that was a typo. I meant today. There are laws that exist to this day that prevent people around the world from cross-dressing. And before we get all revved up writing comments about it's 2018, which it is, and how
Technically, it's 2022 when I'm watching this video and making this motherfucking reaction, but let go.
this seems a little bit retrograde, because it is, we should stop to ask ourselves, when did these laws originate and why did they persist on the books for centuries around the world? Because despite these regulations, there's a long history of folks bucking the gender divide and dressing any way they please, from Joan of Arc to Pachuca fashion in Los Angeles to RuPaul's Drag Race. And if there's one thing you've learned on Origin of Everything, it's that rules and unnecessary laws are often made to be broken. So to start off this week's episode, we first have to ask, when did governments start regulating people's clothing, and why? Well, before the US was caught up in anti-cross-dressing laws in the mid-19th to mid-20th century, and long before there were similar laws on the books around the world, governments were concerned with the style and dress of its citizens. That's because of the so-called sumptuary laws across Europe that looked to making dressing, well, less sumptuous. That's because clothing has often been used as a marker of class, wealth, and distinction. Sumptuary laws aimed to limit spendy-looking fashions because, first, they were considered a sign of sinful indulgence, so scandalous, and And second, as more and more people got access to greater wealth and flashier clothing, European regulatory bodies wanted to make sure that people didn't dress fancier than they actually were. According to Professor Sarah Bond, as early as ancient Athens and Sparta in the 4th century BCE, magisterial bodies were tasked with figuring out what women could and could not wear, and this could include what clothes were appropriate for funerals and
As you see, right, in these positions, these magisterial decision makers are all males. It's crazy how people want to, even to this day, tell me, and it's usually males, what's ladylike and what's not ladylike. How is a man going to tell a woman what's ladylike, how to conduct herself as a lady? You quick to say that a woman can't teach a boy how to be a man, but men can teach girls how to be women? It don't make any sense, bro.
also religious festivals. And their name, roughly translated in English, means controllers of women. Delightful. In some cases, clothing choices were linked directly to one's station in life, as Bond notes that Roman matrons wore stolas, or long tunics, as a sign of respect, whereas there were ancillas for women who were enslaved and meretrix worn by sex workers. Later, in 1157, the Council of Reims banned religious women in the Catholic Church from wearing fancy fabrics like fur trims and silk gowns, and had to do it again in the Council of Vienne in 1311, according to Professor von Seal, since apparently nuns really like to dress up long before Whoopi Goldberg and Sister Act. In his article, Fashion, Sumptuary Laws, and Business, Professor Hermann Freudenberger traces the rise of sumptuary laws from as early as a law passed by Edward III of England that outlawed the outrageous and excessive apparel of diverse people against their estate and degree, to their peak in Europe between 1650 and 1800, because all of those European royals and well-to-do folks didn't like to see people they considered of a lower station wearing the same duds as them. And fashion still kind of operates this way today, because people are less likely to be judgmental of someone wearing an expensive Rolex if they're a celebrity flashing a watch on Instagram than if it's another regular Joe wearing a custom-made ball gown. But sumptuary laws also had a tint of xenophobia in them, since many of the fancy fashions that these European governments sought to cut back on came from foreign countries with wicked senses of style. And that's wicked in the sense of evil, not a Bostonian wicked sense of style. And sumptuary laws continue to be geared towards limiting people's fashion choices well into the 17th and 18th century. Okay, so laws limiting fancy clothes started hundreds of years ago, and some of these laws were gender specific, although they weren't aimed specifically at preventing people from dressing across gender norms, but more at limiting the amount of stunting committed by medieval nuns and newly rich people. So our next question is, when did laws about cross-dressing specifically enter the books, and why? Sociologist Claire Sears' book Arresting Dress, Cross-Dressing, Law and Fascination in 19th Century San Francisco traces the rise of these laws in the US back to the mid-19th century. The first of the cross-dressing laws she found dates back to an 1863 law passed by the San Francisco Board of Supervisors that made it illegal for a person to appear in public in a dress not belonging to his or her sex. And this was part of a larger wave of public decency laws that continued to sweep the nation until around World War I. Sears notes that the cross-dressing ban was part of a larger set of laws that criminalized public nudity, indecent exposure, lewd acts, and immoral performances. They were passed in over 40 US cities between the Civil War and World War I and covered a surprisingly broad terrain of activities, including performers who dressed in drag, transgender people, and people who wore gender-bending clothing of all sorts. But why the sudden rush to legislate cross-dressing? People dressing in different kinds of gendered clothing wasn't exactly hot news beginning in the 19th century. Think of women who crossed the gender divide to join famous battles like Joan of Arc, Sarah Edmonds, a Union soldier in the Civil War, or the Legend of Mulan.
Now, I wanted to show y'all this video because I got another video that I'm going to show y'all that's from PBS Origins, and it's about racial passing, and a lot of it has to do with this, where you would have people that weren't a race, like you would have Asians, right? So when the Chinese Immigration Act came in and, you know, they started kicking out Asian folks and just, you know, pretty much the same thing that they do modern time with Mexicans is what they was doing with motherfucking Asian folks. Around the same time they was out here abusing and recklessly motherfucking terrorizing Africans that they brought here enslaved, doing the same junk to motherfucking Asian folks. The only difference is they actually passed legislation that hindered them, and it was out of motherfucking, you know, some other hate. No other way around it, motherfucking hate. But around this time, you had Asian people, because of the ostracization that came with Asians and Asians not being, you know, looked at as legitimate um, citizens and such like that, Asian folks started to pass. So if you were Asian but could pass as a Latino, you know what I'm saying, you had Asians passing as Mexicans so they can get in on that Braceros program and get, access to jobs and whatever else that they need by passing. The same thing that people did who weren't white. You know that if you look like me, you're going to be treated poorly. You know what I'm saying? You're going to be incarcerated. You're not going to have access to resources, motherfucking education and such. So for those who had biracial parents, you know what I'm saying, that could pass, when you look at them, because this is why I tell people that if you don't look like this, black features, the whole shebang, you're not black. Now, I understand that you got people out here who say, I'm black because my parent is black. I'm biracial. I got a black parent and I got this other non-black parent. I'm black. No, you're biracial. You're not black, because black literally is a tailored experience that is associated with not only your skin color, but your facial features, right? Because there's data out here that shows that people, the darker your skin is, right, you are more likely to be arrested, motherfucking charged, convicted, and when convicted, punished more harshly compared to white skinned people, lighter skinned folks. The whiter your skin is, nigga, the best life is for you. It's sad to say. For us that is dark, you know what I'm saying, is it works out for you pale folks, And the same thing goes with those with Afrocentric features, right? Because you can have a lighter skinned person, right? But you have them with some African facial features, some African structures. Then it's like, oh, the skin got some, but that face, you're looking too black, right? People with Afrocentric features are more likely to be arrested, charged, and convicted, and when convicted, punished more harshly than those with European-centric features. This is just what it is. So with that being said, you can't just hop the fence because you got a black parent, you know what I'm saying? Or a black relative somewhere up the food chain, you know what I'm saying? Up the ancestry line. It's an experience that is tailored to you, because some of y'all niggas could look at you and be like, and don't see a lick of black, and they'll check a box for you, be like, what? Because your experiences is not how you think, right? It's how people motherfucking look at you, and they process how they view you, and then their actions of how they treat you comes out of how their brain just process looking at you, right? So you can sit here and claim to be black as much as you want, but when society look at you and see other than black, nigga, you gonna be treated as anything other than black. Therefore, you're not black. You're biracial, or whatever the freak you are, just not black, right? And so I had to put that out there, because this cross-dressing ain't much different than people racially passing. You had people who would cross-dress just so they could receive benefits, because they know that if they maintain that, like if you born a female, right? Female, you couldn't open no bank account. You couldn't own property. You know what I'm saying? And if you a female in a relationship with a black dude or a native guy or a Mexican, you know what I'm saying? During these times where black people, natives, Asians, and all these, they weren't viewed as citizens. So you couldn't even rely on your mother freaking non-white male to help you out, because they ain't even viewed as a citizen. You as a woman ain't viewed as a citizen, and neither is these colored males. So what you do, person who could pass as white, you put on a mother freaking outfit, make yourself look like a dude, and shabam.
Women also pretended to be men to get ahead, like Dr. James Barry, an Irish doctor and soldier who was born Marianne Bulkey in 1789 before assuming the name of an uncle in order to pursue an education as a physician. And Ellen Craft emancipated herself and her husband William by dressing as a white man, pretending William was her servant, and traveling north out of slavery in first-rate trains and hotels. But these 19th century laws were geared toward
fraud has been committed since America has been created.
Eliminating people who didn't dress according to gendered expectations from public life by criminalizing different forms of dress. And in the 20th century, these laws saw a new resurgence as cities began to swell and social attitudes began to rapidly change. In the 1950s and 1960s, police officers often enforced these cross-dressing laws when they laid raids on gay and lesbian community hangouts in order to arrest, harass, and discriminate against patrons who were congregating there, which was the case during the 1966 Compton's cafeteria riots and was one of the inciting factors of the Stonewall riot of 1969. And around the same time in Buffalo, New York, butch lesbian women could be arrested for wearing less than 3 pieces of female clothing.
That's New York.
I'm not entirely sure how you would begin to even count something like this, and it wasn't until attitudes began to rapidly change again through the careful activism of gay and transgender communities that these laws were eventually repealed or thrown out altogether in the 1970s. So, how does it all add up? While anti-cross-dressing legislation isn't enforced in the US today, there are still restrictive dressing laws that exist around the world, and most of these laws seem to fall disproportionately on women, whether it's laws dictating religious dress in Saudi Arabia, or a ban on miniskirts in Uganda.
I have to clarify that, yes, there is still some law enforcing when it comes to women should look like this and men should look like this in the United States. It may not be so prevalent in the citizen realm, you know, like out here with the regular folk, but when you go into the military, bruh, it's a complete difference, right? Complete difference. Where recently the Marine Corps dress blues uniform is more tailored to look like the male's dress blue uniform. We still have like strategically, like distinctively different parts of our attire that is enforced. You know what I'm saying? A guy in the Marine Corps can't just out the blue be like, I'm gonna grow out my hair and put on a motherfucking bun. They can't put on no dress blue skirt and heels. You know what I'm saying? I mean, to be honest, the military still motherfucking ostracized against motherfucking trans and stuff. I mean, I'm young. I'm only 29 years old, and I served in the military. Literally within my first like 2 years of serving in the military is when they did the Don't Ask, Don't Tell repeal, and they started to slow down with penalizing folks for being homosexual. But I remember it straight up came out to be that when my motherfucking CO, and I'm gonna tell this story another time, but when my motherfucking commanding officer at the time, he was a chief foreign officer, I want to say 3, it was Chief Foreign Officer Anthony Hill. This nigga used to, I mean, I'm gonna watch my mouth there, but this nigga motherfucking worshiped the ground that I walked on. He motherfucking ate food off my toes. Like this is how much this dude sucked up to me. Most people started telling me like maybe he had a thing for you. It's weird because he's an ugly bald white guy. You know what I'm saying? At the time I'm like a teenager, 18, 19, 20, and this nigga looked to be about 40 some odd years old. You know what I'm saying? Just ugly and bald and old and white. But this dude used to favor me. Like I ain't never get NJP. I was out here like full blown busting niggas in the face for talking sideways to me. Like people you'll be fighting. You know what I'm saying? People come to me with the disrespect, we was fighting. And a lot of times it was higher ranked people. And I ain't get in trouble. I didn't get in trouble a lot of time. When that nigga decided to NJP me was after he found out that I was dating my wife. At the time she was my girlfriend. And once he found out, and he found out because my wife's roommate snitched us out, talking about we were staying in each other's room. I'm telling you, the story will take me anywhere else. So I'll explain that later to you. But she snitched us out for being in my wife's room. It got to the dude. He was all pissy. And then I had an interaction with my staff NCO where I was talking to the dude with my hands on my hips. And then something else happened. I was motherfucking dispatching trucks. And he just like was like, you know what? I can't really hem you for being gay because of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell repeal, but I'm going to use all of this stuff around you and I'm going to just dump it on you. And that's exactly what this nigga did. He went from not ever penalizing me, you know what I'm saying? Not ever, punishing me to this nigga took instances that they weren't punishing worthy, right? But this nigga took them and blew it the freak up because once he found out that I was gay, and in the relationship with my wife, that nigga he flipped the switch, He did everything in his power to separate us, because even when we had PCS, we were getting ready to leave that duty station and go to our next duty station. Most couples, when they leave and they'll try to put in for them to get, go the same place. It works out. Not me and my wife. We got separated. I ended up attached to a motherfucking raggedy naval base called 1st Med Battalion, and my wife ended up in this motherfucking raggedy, janky Marine Corps, unit. I said base, but the Navy unit. And then my wife got stuck with this raggedy Marine unit called 9th Com. And yeah, they kept us separate. Probably thought that, with all that stuff happening, it was gonna lead us to split. And nah, bro. All these years later, we going on 11 years together. This year be 9 married. So it is what it is.
Or France's
But it exists in the U.S. That's the whole point of all of this. It exists in the U.S.
infamous and widely covered burqa ban. Although all three of these examples have quite disparate histories and aren't aligned to say that they're of the same piece, but rather to point out that government interference in clothing options isn't quite over yet. And even though cross-dressing laws in the US are off the books, that doesn't mean that questions of dress code regulations and propriety aren't still flaring up across the country today, such as should women be forced to wear high heels if it's part of a uniform? And do dress codes that limit distracting clothing actually help students learn, or do they just give school administrators one more reason to tally up demerits and detentions while targeting students based on their own biases about what's appropriate? So while we're always told it's what's on the inside that counts, it seems like folks have a lot of anxiety about what's covering our outsides and how that aligns with our social standing, political choices, and identities. So what do you think? Anything to add to this history of why cross-dressing was criminalized? Any answers about how precisely to measure the number of female clothing items a person is wearing? Drop it down below. Be sure to follow Origin of Everything on Facebook and YouTube, and I'll see you here next week.
I hope you guys learned something from this. Until the next motherfucking video, peace. If you want people to think otherwise of you more positively, then give them more positive experiences.